Hey, what's up? What's up? This is Steven. You're watching Pure Hearts, and in this episode, we will be discussing: are Christians not doing enough to draw a line in the sand?
I'm not a religious scholar, and I'm not an expert on Islam. I'm doing my best, and I'm reading the Quran as often as I can. And it does say that Christians on the day of reckoning will see how close they were to the truth. And we are allies. We are not enemies in any regard, Christians and Muslims. And I do believe that the idea of Christians and Muslims shaking hands and saying, let's put an end to a lot of this garbage would be fantastic. I'm not anti-Christian in any regard. I just found myself, as I became more and more religious, seeking and looking for a faith which not only I could be proud of, but a faith which was guiding in regards to, I don't know what a Christian would answer to certain questions nowadays. What does a Christian answer to? I'm a transsexual and I want to show your kids my genitals. What's a Christian? Well, a Christian's supposed to say no, do they? I know what my Muslim friends would say. I don't know. If you're a Christian, I don't know how you're supposed to act. I don't know what you're supposed to adopt. I don't get it anymore.
The true believer says
the true
no.
believer. The true believer.
Yeah.
But how many are true believers? I don't know. I see all over Twitter, all these churches are losing their minds. It seems very complicated. Islam seems very, very simple. You know what's right, you know what's wrong.
So yes, as you guys may or may not know, there's this guy that I caught on an interview named Andrew Tate. Now, he's a controversial figure, to say the least. And there's a lot of things I don't agree with him on, especially, number one, he's Muslim, so he has a very different way of thinking about God. But on the other hand, too, he used to be Christian. He was raised Christian in Britain. His father was black, and his mother was something else. I don't know exactly. He actually could easily get away with looking like an Arab, like Arab type Muslim. So I think he'll be easily accepted there. Not that I would recommend it, but and the reason why he decided to convert to Muslim versus Christian is because he didn't really see Christians really protecting their house, their line, their children as much. Getting really indoctrinated, right? Indoctrinated by society, the public schools, whatever you can think of. There wasn't really much of a line to draw, at least in the modern Christian day. Maybe in the 50s and 60s, right? But after 1965, especially, things have gotten out of hand, and now there's some good things that happen. Obviously, like the Jesus movement in the 70s, with some churches you may know were involved in it, including the churches that I can't think of the church right now, but they're on the radio. There's a lot of churches that were involved in the Jesus movement, let's just say, including Calvary Chapel, and I believe that one, Maranatha, right? They're kind of a part of the same movement, right? And you had the black churches too. I'm sure you had some Latino churches, but all in all, it was just a bunch of hippies getting together, and they found out about Jesus. They stopped doing their drugs. They started being more sane, and they're cool people coming together, kind of like what's happening now. But something happened along the way, right? The church did get very, very, I guess you could say religious in some way. But it was like that since the 50s, So that part didn't change. Actually, you could argue from the outsider's perspective that churches have gotten cooler in a way, right? And some people think that's a bad thing in a sense where the music changed. We don't have those classical hymns anymore. I think hymns are important, but it's not. I don't think it's a requirement either. The trick was that how far were we willing to go outside to the normal realm of not music per se, but just culture, right? Because music can influence culture, the way we dress, right? The way we present ourselves, things like that. And the Christian church has become very casual, I'm a very casual person myself, as you can see me wearing this half suit here as a joke. Just kidding. But yeah. Now most of the time I won't be wearing this. I was filming something else. So I just figured I'll keep it on. So yeah. So every once in a while you see me changing my style a little bit, but I didn't wear this suit to make a point here, or maybe I am. I don't know. I just want to press record and start talking. So yeah, so the Maranatha and the Calvary Chapels, they came together, they did the Jesus movement, and, things happen, right? Things happen there. And we fast forward till today. You had the 90s and the early 2000s. The church still had some leeway, in the sense where they had some influence. They had some authority of what was appropriate. And the 90s was already getting out of hand in a way with TV, movies, but the church still held their ground very well until we got to 2008 with the gay rights movement and Obama and approving that. Things kind of changed a little bit, right? Things kind of went to that slippery slope, right? So you had the Christians complaining about Harry Potter at the beginning, but nowadays the Christians don't waste their time because they figure, well, the line has already been moved, right? And now we have all these situations with the kids, right? In schools, the public teachers and kids learning about sex at a young age inappropriately. You had a fight breaking out recently in Burbank, brawling over, hey, they're tired of their kids learning this crazy stuff. So that was really the breaking point. And these are just normal people. These are not the Christians, right? So the question is, what went wrong with the Christians? I'm not talking about the religious Christians that are just overly religious, but there were some good parts to that, in the sense where they had a line that you just didn't cross, right? And some of us grew up like that. Other parents or grandparents may not have had the exact same upbringing, right? So it really just depends on how you're raised, what city you're in. I was raised in California, so we're a little bit more loose. And yeah, so back to Andrew Tate. He basically made a very interesting statement, and I can't disagree with his point, in the sense that Christians have held the line for a very long time. All right, so let's not get that twisted. But there has been some certain churches out there, and I'm not going to name names because I don't really know which churches they really are, because that's up to God to decide, right? But we can judge a tree by its fruit, right? You have some complaints about certain churches going a little too far in this area or that area, trying to be too cool. Hey, I think it's just a generational thing, right? I think things are going to change. Music is going to change. The electric guitar was in the 90s, were seen as, in the 80s and the 60s, 70s, was seen as, demonic, and the sound wasn't good. It was this, that, and even I've gotten some complaints about that at one point when I introduced the electric guitar to my church, right? And I'm like, well, electric guitars have been around for a long time. They are used for different things and different types of churches, right? And depending on if it's a concert or not, you probably won't even notice the guitar, right? It's just really a part of the music, and it depends on the style and it depends on a lot of things, right? So the electric guitar thing and that was a little bit overboard, probably. Now there's some people that still agree with that, like, oh, electric guitar is bad, we shouldn't use it or whatever. I'm like, okay, well. So yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, so the electric guitar was a thing for a long time, but it wasn't just that. It was just the way we dressed. It was the way we carried ourselves, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with Christians being like normal people to an extent, but there are certain things that I think we should separate ourselves from, and then some of that may be language, maybe it's some things that we watch on TV or participate in, going to clubs, things like that. So Christians, especially these days, have kind of forget that they're Christians, right? Kind of forget where they came from, or kind of forget that they're redeemed, right, by the blood of the Lamb, right, and the word of our testimonies, right? So I think other people, the Christians who are going to clubs and things like that, pretending that they're not Christians because they're hiding their faith, it's not a good look either. And anybody who's watching this who do go to clubs or hang out, sleep around, whatever, that could be a symptom of just the church not really drawing a line. Parents specifically, because I'm not even blaming the pastors completely. The pastors are going to say what they're going to say. The pastors will say the word, and that's that. Then you go back home and think this is some type of show instead of really pondering what the pastor said. And then there's also lines of how you're raised and things like that. So there could be many factors into why the Christian church has kind of pushed the line further and further and further, because the other side was pushing us further and further to be more and more and more accepting of the smallest little things, right? And you could argue that obviously America is dealing with that, and it would be wrong with all this Pride Month. This is Pride Month as I'm recording this, so there's a lot of crazy things going on, and there's a lot of companies who are in trouble because they overdid it. They overstepped their line, as they say. Their grace is very, very thin right now. Let's just put it that way. And the normies, not even the Christians, the normies are really taking a stand right now. What I mean by normies is the non-Christians, right? They're not the people who don't know much about Christianity. They're just everyday people. Maybe they are Christians like myself, but they don't really go to church as much, or they don't really read the Bible as much as they should. But they're kind of aware of things, right? And they still pray to God. There's those people as well, and there's also the people who are not Christians at all, and they just are tired of the kids being taught what they're teaching in public schools and the media and all that. So my last video was not really criticizing, but really just warning, kind of pointing out that our media can be better, right? And we do have Christian schools, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But we need more of those probably. But yes, I know a guy who teaches at a Christian school, and most Christian schools are likely private. So we can get away with that. I think in a way that it's easier to put our kids in Christian schools these days, right? Because there's more of them. But how effective are they? I've heard some rumors about Catholic churches that aren't so bright, right? So it's not so I don't know, not a good look. Let's just put it that way, right? And there's some Catholic schools that aren't as bad, so, or it could have been just depending on the students and their stories. And the public schools are a mess. Homeschool is not the easiest thing to get your kids into, but it is recommended by most people who've done it. Even if it's difficult, your kids will likely have a higher IQ and do better in school, finish early, and get on with their careers, so they can be more effective financially, which will help society as a whole, right? And they won't be as diluted, right, as you would be in public schools. So that's important for the kids today, and more and more people are doing it because they have to. The movie that I saw, God's Not Dead, I believe they covered that on the last God's Not Dead movie, We the People, which I interviewed Kate Hayes, who was one of the smaller role characters on there. You can see that episode a few episodes ago, last season in 2021, I believe. It took me this long to start this channel back, guys. So, yeah, so you can see that. But basically, it covered homeschool and how difficult it actually is to deal with the state or the city when it comes to certain criteria that they sometimes want to force homeschool people to do. And it makes it almost impossible to do it. So you have to kind of figure out a way around it, right? Back to Andrew Tate. He's a kickboxer. I think he's a 4-time world champion, and he has this thing about, okay, he's like a womanizer, or he's a human trafficker. He did OnlyFans and things like that. He's like that type of guy. He did some worked with girls in cam work, and then he converted to Muslim. But he was originally a Christian. He was raised Christian. I'm not sure about if it was with his father or his mother. His father was a chess player, and he would charge $500 an hour for kids to learn and master chess. And parents would pay it, the people who had money. The people who didn't have money or didn't care whether or not their son was good enough or daughter didn't pay the money, right? So it was the parents who actually cared about their kids' education, right? And moving along, he was influenced by his father. About excellence and things like that. And his father grew up, having his own lines, right? Having his own values, and didn't cross those lines. He was very tough, so he was raised that way. Even though Andrew Tate converted to Christianity, converted to Muslim, he still has respect for Christians. Obviously, the issue isn't the book, right? The issue that he had with Christianity was the fact that nobody was afraid of us, right? Not that anybody should be afraid of us, but nobody was afraid of the God that we serve, in a sense that we're meek, or maybe it's not meekness, it's more weakness. They're not really seeing Christians as much of a threat because we don't have much of a line. Anybody can just cross over it, bully us, whatever they want to do, and the state, the city, the schools, the organizations, the companies won't do anything about it. And very rarely do they defend Christians. And so that's really the issue here. And we know that this is going to happen from the Bible. So that's kind of my defense of it. It's like no Christian is perfect, but we also know that persecution was inevitable, right? Is inevitable, and it's been happening for thousands of years. So, so we need to remember that if you feel like you're being bullied because you're a Christian, it's just because you probably need to look back in the New Testament of what Jesus said. You will be persecuted for my name's sake. The question is, are you saying his name, or are you just hiding in a cowardly way? I'm not saying I'm not guilty of that at times, but I've always been pretty transparent that I'm a Christian. I've never hid it. It's just that sometimes maybe we need to bring it up more on purpose, just to let people know that, hey, we are still around, right? So I think that's important. And do the little things like wear a cross, have to get a conversation going. Wear a shirt that says something controversial about Jesus in a good way. Right? Nothing too political, just like good enough, right? Because you don't need to be that political to stir a conversation. And so Andrew Tate just didn't respect the Christian people for the fact that they didn't draw a line, and it allowed their kids in America to be corrupted. And look at these pastors' sons and daughters, right? There have been literally sons and daughters from pastors who've done just as bad, if not worse, than non-Christians, right? Because I think that pressure of being a pastor's son and daughter sometimes just makes the kids want to be rebellious, and they just go off the rails. It's kind of like the prodigal son in a way, right? It's very similar to that. Maybe they come back to normal later on in their lives, saying, oh yeah, that was stupid, I was just being rebellious. Or maybe they never do, right? And look at Katy Perry, right? Katy Perry has pastors, a pastor as a father, right? A father as a pastor. So that was surprising. I'm not sure if they still are pastors. Maybe they are. I think they are. The question is, what type of pastors are they? We know that Katy Perry, represents certain things. But even her, I think she moved out of Hollywood and into, I think, Tennessee or somewhere around that area, because it was just better overall family oriented feel. It was just different than Hollywood. Hollywood is just kind of a shell of itself. Maybe it was always a shell. I don't know. So yeah, you have Katy Perry. We have many examples of Christians just kind of going off the rails and kind of moving on. You have Marty Sampson from Hillsong moving on. Just not enough. I don't know what it is. It's just not enough power, faith, whatever it is. He lost his faith. Maybe he knew what was going on with Hillsong. It wasn't perfect. He wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. And Hillsong's not a perfect church. I don't think we should abandon it completely. But sometimes the leadership may not be perfect, and we attack everybody who works there. Same thing with Bethel, right? Bethel has made some pretty bad mistakes, but I'm not judging them completely, just judging really more the leadership, and that's really up to God to judge, really, right? And the tarot cards that weren't really tarot cards, but they look like tarot cards to kind of attract young people and just stuff like that. That's my line. Like when you have to go that far to impress people, right? Now I'm all for like the Narnias of the world in a sense where if it represents something and it's telling a story that makes sense, that's parallel to Christ, I don't mind it. Just don't overdo it, right? So I think it depends on who you're talking to, and like, okay, is this appropriate? Is this not appropriate? Right? Because there's the overly religious Christians who push people in the church so far as a response to the overly religious people to make maybe not the best material or ideas to attract younger people or people outside of the Christian world. I think personally, we just need to make really good content. It doesn't have to be over the top, the opposite of Christianity, but it also doesn't have to be overly religious and just made for Christians, right? We need to make content for everybody else too. So yeah, I think that's basically what I have to say. Andrew Tate just doesn't see a reason to be Christian at the moment. I'm glad he was interviewed by a Christian guy. I think he understands too. And Andrew Tate just didn't see a reason to stay, just to convert to Christianity. But being a Muslim, moving to Dubai, potentially raising his kids there, because they're not infiltrated by all this LGBT stuff, and they're not the more pure in the sense that they're really, really strict on their beliefs, even though we know good and well they're not perfect. And they have a lot of grapes there and just crazy things from different countries we see, because they think that it's okay to do that because the woman is wants it, or it's her fault for being a woman, or it's her fault for not dressing completely covered. They use it as an excuse to just be a bunch of demons, right? So there's that side of it. But there are some similarities in the sense where they believe in the Old Testament in some ways. They do believe in Jesus. According to Andrew Tate, they respect Jesus more than a lot of Christians do. I almost believe it sometimes, right? And so, yeah, and that's really the issue. So if we Christians aren't holding the line and protecting our kids from corruption, allowing our kids to go to public schools, really we're not going to the board meetings as much, the school board meetings. I actually discovered that I can go too without having kids. So that's a good, thing for everybody to do. Just go to those school meetings where you can kind of have the mic and tell them off, right? And boycott those LGBT ESG companies that just want to promote racial division and all that, just so they can get more money and be approved for more loans with the ESG, which is really kind of like a credit score for I like to say wokeness, but just basically fake compassion, right, for people who are not like us. That's basically what it is. It's just kind of masking their intentions and trying to have a high ESG score to be approved for the biggest loans and be protected if something happens to their company, right? And again, if you're debt free and you live that way, that might be easier for Christian companies to have as little debt as possible, so we won't need these big banks like Chase, the worst one, B of A, Citi, all those big banks. There's a recent bank that not closed down, but they got in huge trouble because people were de-investing it, and people needed to get their money out of there because they invested too much in tech, right? And they overdid it. And so those same companies would be protected by an ESG score if they wanted to get a loan to protect their bank or be bailed out by the government. I think it was San Francisco or some Silicon Valley type bank that funds tech. And don't even get me started in the tech world. But yes, so if we can get our own banks, fund ourselves as Christians, and I know there's Christians who have their own banks, so already. So we need to find out who they are and what they actually represent, and maybe hopefully they don't end up like Chick-fil-A, who's kind of pandering just a little bit for the ESG. And what do they need that for, right? What do they need all these diversity, inclusion type policies and all that for? So in and out so far, from my experience as a company, has been holding out very well. They've been pretty consistent. They have the verses of the Bible on their products and all that. 3:16, John 3:16. So things like that. There's just that simple consistency that's not completely in your face, but just like a nice verse. Just the word's powerful, guys. Just put a verse on your car or something. I don't know. I do know. So there's the little things we can do to really share the word, but also we got to be tougher, guys, and make people in America fear God once again. So if they fear the Muslim God more than they fear our God, specifically in America or all around the world, that is a problem. Now, I know it's not the worst. It's not as bad as we think it is, probably, but just the way they easily bully Christians is a problem, in a sense where we live in the 21st century. We have access to a lot these days, right? They're not killing Christians in America or most places as much anymore, except for the third world countries and the communist countries and things, those types of countries. They are doing some crazy stuff to Christians, so it's still happening, just not in as much in the Western countries. So because of that, we have an advantage. We should take advantage of it, build our resources in order to attack those kinds of influences, right? Maybe bring some Christians here as missionaries, whatever. So I just wanted to rant about that. Just kind of struck me when he said that, like, man, Christians really don't seem very intimidating, right? I'm not saying we're supposed to. I'm just saying, like, our God has to be intimidating to everybody else. We need to show by our example that we do fear God, right? So that's basically the message I want to share, and I'm guilty of it too. I could do better. We all could do better, but we are redeemed by the curse of the law, and I repent for not being the best example Christian. And I'm sure there's things that I've missed along the way, a lot of things. And let's just ponder about that, guys. What can we do to be better Jesus serving people and be a good example to our kids, our ministry, the people coming up, the young people, the schools, education system, the corporations, small businesses, YouTube, internet, whatever it is, engineering. So let's be a good example. Let's show some integrity, guys, and let's make Christians look good again. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm out.